Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. Just a couple of days ago I made a video called We Need to Talk about the megastructures under the pyramid, where I was examining and trying to figure out whether these new claims that now have gone viral about these megalithic structures and tubes going underneath the pyramids was real or fake. Now, that was the first assessment, if you will, where we reviewed some articles, reviewed a study from 2022 that was also published by the same people that are making these claims. However, as mentioned on that video, there is a conference which can be found on the channel Expedition Nicole Ciccolo, where these three speakers, which we see represented here on the thumbnail of that video, actually present these findings. And just for clarity, the names that you see here are not in the same order as the pictures. This is Professor Corrado Malanga, this is Armando Mei, and this is Filippo Biondi. Now, the conference in question is 3 hours, 53 minutes and 13 seconds. I watched the entire thing. It's in Italian, but I'm a native speaker of Italian. Therefore, what I'm going to do now for you is provide the most comprehensive analysis of every single word they used, what they said, and I will dissect everything. All the sentences, the rhetoric, the discussion, the claims, the way things were presented, so that you can know exactly what was said, how it was said, down to every single possible detail. 4 hours, I could have played 2 games of Heroes of Might and Magic 3. I hope you appreciate my sacrifice. Alright, so let's begin with the details of this conference. I'm not going to show clips because I don't know if they copy claim. It all begins with Nicole Ciccolo, who is the owner of the channel that I've already very briefly showed on my previous video, would refer you to that. Then we have an intro with a little music, and then we begin with the 3 speakers. Speaker number 1 is Armando Mei, speaker number 2 is Filippo Biondi, and then we finish the conference with the last and most important speaker, who is Corrado Malanga. And goodness gracious, this guy likes to swear. Who he likes to swear? The conference happened on the 16th of March 2025. It started at 2:30 p.m. and it was held at the Hotel Artemide Congressi. We are told that they had 900 spectators and the tickets sold out. Now, before we dive into what they actually said during the conference, I do want to say something when it comes to the way the conference was advertised to the public. I'm not going to read the whole thing, just a couple of sentences. Notice this. A team of researchers made of Filippo Biondi, Armando Mei, and Corrado Malanga united their forces to reveal once and for all what that no one else until today had the ability and courage to investigate. Well, when you put it like that, we can already know why they sold out the tickets. Well, as she begins the presentation and introduces the speakers, she says, open quotes, "We are witnesses of something historical which never happened before." Then she proceeds to read a passage from Gilgamesh, which I will opt out due to lack of relevancy. After this breathtaking statement, we are now welcomed by the intro. And this is when the situation starts to become a little problematic, because on minute 6:02, we see a Stargate, while on minute 8:06 is when we see a reptilian. There he is in all of his glory. I believe that's a reptilian. I was actually quite offended by that. I was hoping for some grace, not reptilian. It's alright, don't worry, I'll make a video about you. Now, I'll drop the sarcasm for a moment. Let's try to divide the context in which this has been shared, which appears to be a bit goofy, from the actual data and information presented. How did the speakers explain and justify their findings? Is there any truth that we can find as we ourselves review the data and analyze the interpretative findings, as interpretation it is? And you'll see what interpreted it, which is also a little bit of a problem here, something we learn after 3 hours, so yeah. But in general, I'm here to keep an open mind. I always keep an open mind, and I find all of these claims to be absolutely fascinating. But it must be said that the context in which this conference happened, not great. If you have been exposed to this through TikTok or YouTube channels that didn't do even a speck of research and just repeated what the TikTokers said, you will find lots of sci-fi sounding claims. The pyramids are power plants and they have tubes underground that generate electricity. Or they found an underground city. Did you hear the term city being used? I do want to tell you whether or not they did mention these terms specifically. When it comes to the city, I think the reason why people are calling it a city is because both the first speaker in details and the third speaker on passing mentioned the city of Amenti, meaning the hidden city of the dead in Egyptian mythology. I do confirm that both the first and the third speaker mention it, and that's what they think they have found. I'll tell you which area of the scans the third speaker identified as, and I'm quoting directly, open quotes, the rooms of Amenti, close quotes. But the main problem here is the connection, the way the first speaker justifies this claim, which is absolutely ridiculous. But I am going to tell it how it is. I'm not saying that there are no structures underneath the pyramid. I'm saying that they did mention Amenti, and the way they connected it to the findings, particularly the first speaker, is ludicrous. Contrary to what several articles and a few YouTube videos said, none of the speakers mentions a power plant or the pyramids to be used as power plants, but they do present an alternative usage of the pyramids, which would go beyond the idea of being a funerary site or maybe even a necropolis, if you want to use that term. They don't say power plants, but they do say something, and I'll tell you because that's as we reach the third speaker. He's the one who tells us what these pyramids are there to do. And to finish up with her, so we can move to the first speaker, here's one more thing that she said, my translation. Open quotes, "You are the vanguard of a new time, because from today we begin to write a new page of history. And I'm not exaggerating, the true history of our remote past." Close quotes. His presentation begins on minute 11:34, and it will continue to speak about 1 hour and 2 minutes in the conference. Out of the three speakers, he's the one I like the least. His methodology is all over the place. His rhetoric is terrible. And even though he's the one who's supposed to give us an introduction to how this project came to be, he throws in a lot of metaphysical interpretation, speaks about the spirit, speaks about the mind. It's all over the place. To quote him, he calls the project in question as a, open quotes, project of research that is extremely serious, close quotes. However, on minute 17:36 is when he makes the first claim, where he says that the simple fact that he ran into the other two researchers as he was also working on the pyramid, the same pyramid that they were working on. He said that happened by chance, but it's not chance because, open quotes, it obviously wasn't random because chance doesn't exist, close quotes. Suggesting a sort of preordained or destined that fate, I guess, that they would have to start this quest. And then on minute 18:30 he actually says that they are such a good group that they almost border telepathy. I hope that was just an analogy, but with the stuff that I'm going to tell you, he said, I'm not so sure. On minute 13:84, he calls the other two speakers geniuses. Finally, at 20 minutes and 10 seconds in, he presents his first hypothesis. He basically contrasts the dating of the Giza plateau, which is normally dated by professional archaeologists and historians, to 10,500 years BC. However, he contrasts that and instead proceeds to provide a different dating, which is 36,400 years before Christ. He then very briefly glanced through the reasonings as to why he's adding 20,000 years, more than 26,000 years to the accepted dating of the place, and the only way he does that is by saying, oh, well, you need to take into consideration all the other temples that are in the Giza plateau, not just the pyramids and the Sphinx. And that's it. That's his entire justification as to why he's adding 26,000 years in the past for the dating of the Giza plateau. He then goes into talking about how it's important to understand the systems of communication of this civilization. Now, I find it interesting that he talks about the word civilization, even though he's affirming that this happened 36,400 years, where we don't currently believe there was a civilization. Now, maybe there was one, but he gives it as a statement of fact, not as an hypothesis at this point. On minute 38 is when he starts saying how he disagrees once again with academics when it comes to the identification of a sarcophagus that he instead believes to be a bathtub or some kind of tub. Once again, no justification provided for that alternative interpretation. He then makes a statement according to which, since there are no hieroglyphs that we can read in these pyramids, he needs to find their code, which he believes to be numbers. This is where it's gonna get really insane with Mr. May. Once again, my least favorite speaker. Around minute 45, it ditches the pyramids for a moment and focuses our attention to the Temple of the Valley, which is once again one of the temples that is found in the complex proper. He provides this 2D projection of the temple seen from on high, and that's where he goes absolutely insane. Remember that he mentioned before that he needed to decode whatever the heck these ancient people were trying to tell us without using hieroglyphs, and that he was going to use numbers. Well, here they are. So what he does, he sees this little thing here, which is part of the map of the corridors inside the temple, and interprets this as number 3. Then he says that there are 16 columns, and for some reasons that he does not explain, he tells us, well, it's 16 columns, so that means 7. For whatever reason, that means 7. Then he says that there is this little niche in here. For some reasons, decides to single this one out, give up on anything else, the rooms, the other corridors, nothing. He just decides that this niche is important. There is only one, and therefore this gives us number 1, and comes in this extremely dishonest way to number 137. At this point, he gives up trying to make sense of number 173, acknowledging that that made no sense, and decides to, for whatever reason, flip it. As I translate, open quotes, which, and I didn't even do it on purpose, appears to be the anagram of number 371, close quotes. He then explains to tell us that this number represents, open quotes, the transcendent form of man which reincarnates himself to a new life, close quotes. You'll hear a lot of these, by the way. He then finally mentions the city of Amenti on minute 48:28. On minute 50, he says once again that he, open quotes, believes that nothing is random, close quotes. Then he comes up with another number, 432, telling that this connects space-time with immortality, and affirms that all of this that we have just seen created out of thin air is, open quotes, an indication of what could be underneath the Giza plateau, close quotes. In other words, this man has claimed up to this point, 50 minutes in the conference, that 36,400 years ago there was a civilization that decided to build a temple in a specific order in order to give him hints on some numbers that they wanted us to interpret from a certain number of corridors, but not the other corridors, just the corridors that he liked. And by interpreting these numbers, they are telling him that there is something underneath. This is insane. Minute 51:12 is when he finally introduces the Emerald Tables. He does mention that academia doesn't consider these to be a real finding or something that can be dated, considering the fact that we don't have the originals. But once again, he thinks that's a cover-up. But that's where we have a lot of description of the city of Amenti, which is why he will still proceed to use them as evidence. He then puts up a translation of these words that you see on the left side that he and his team, even though they are not linguists and they are not trained to do it, decided to interpret in a completely different way and provide an alternative interpretation. I'm not even going to go through the interpretation for now, but let's just suffice to say that it's extremely unprofessional. It's clear that they have no idea what they are talking about. It is clear that it has nothing to do with ancient Semitic or ancient Sumerian thought processes, and what they're doing is that they're projecting modern day pseudo new age ideas of spirit that I can tell you right off the bat do not belong to those cultures, just to justify a connection to the possibility of having the city of Amenti underneath the Giza plateau. Finally, 1 hour 02, that's the end of the first speaker, and you have seen nothing. Speaker number 2 starts his presentation on 1 hour and 4 minutes in, and is the one that I consider to be the best one out of the 3. His entire presentation lasts until 1 hour and 52 minutes in, and I would like to underline that even though, once again, I thought he was the best speaker, these were the most boring 50 minutes of my life. After the introduction of Speaker 1, which was all about the justification, and he completely failed to do that, Speaker 2 talks about the technology specifically. Now, given a lot of the stuff he said, he used a lot of big words, but here is the gist of what I understood. Of course, do refer to someone who does understand the technology, SAR, professionally, for a better description and assessment of his explanations. What they're claiming is that they're using a technique that no one else has ever used, and the gists of this technique is that they are utilizing 2 satellites from space to generate a SAR imaging. But this time, instead of trying to penetrate the ground with the conventional way of using SAR, which would make it for a very superficial analysis, they are using sonar. So, all of these images, which we're going to review, and I'll tell you everything what they said about each and every single one of these, this is sound. That's what you're looking at. Sound, specifically vibrations that are captured through the satellite, and then they use their own eyes to try and come to the conclusions, aka this, with the help of artificial intelligence. Now, the section about artificial intelligence, which helped them build all of this, is the part that I think removed all sorts of credibility, particularly from the third speaker, who is supposed to be the big guy, the genius behind all of this, because he does not understand how AI language models work. I will get to that once we reach the third speaker. I'm not necessarily refuting that maybe there is something to this. Maybe there is something underneath the pyramids. But the methodology, the rhetoric, the justifications, and in general the logical process as to how we see X, therefore it means Y, that was used by all three speakers, particularly the first and the third, is subpar and extremely unprofessional. This doesn't necessarily refute that maybe they did find something with this tech, but whatever it is, they did a horrible job at making it sound convincing, and you'll see why. So do stick until the end. Open quotes, a technique that we have made to be able to have underground scans. Close quotes. He then proceeds to explain that these satellites, he doesn't really mention two, but the third speaker does, so he tells us that these satellites are in low orbit. On 1 hour and 20 minutes in, he makes the following remark, open quotes. The heretic thought always wins. Heretic, ere, means aero, meaning air, therefore liberty, freedom. Close quotes. From the context, what I understood by this is that he mentioned how sometimes there were groundbreaking visionaries and people that sort of challenged the established status quo or whatever it is, the established model within any form of academia. And then he says that they were always right. Sort of new frontiers for science and archaeology and history and whatever. I will say, however, that his etymology and connection to then freedom is nonsense. He just made that one up. Returning to the technical explanation, it tells us that these SAR, the way they're using it, are transmitting impulses, specifically electromagnetic impulses, to the Earth in order to receive echoes of the sounds and vibration underneath the ground. But now let's talk about the validation of this technique, which he talks about on 1 hour 44 minutes in. Now, up to this point, I'm not liking the presentation one bit, but I want to be fair. As you know, that's what I always do. And one of the things that is often used against these gentlemen when it comes to this new technology that they use, which of course has been seen with a certain level of skepticism, is the fact that professional scientists say, well, you need to test this tech with other structures to see if it works first, and then you should apply it under the pyramids. But they claim that they did. So 1 hour 45 minutes, as you see, talks about the tunnels that are in the Gran Sasso d'Italia, and they say that they were able to use this technology to see correctly pathways and tunnels that we know are there through our topographic mapping, as you can see here and here. This says analysis of the vibrations. And then as the second geolocation where they tried to use this technology to see if it worked, he talks about the Dam of Mosul, once again making claims that the tunnel that is found inside this dam was in fact correctly identified by their scan methodology, as indicated by this picture. As you can see, there is this long blue line would correspond exactly to the tunnel that we do find underneath the dam. And then, as you can see, these areas that appear red, which I imagine by watching this, it means they vibrate more, would be equivalent to the turbines that are found underneath. All of this is interesting, but the problem with this is that it's still not enough, in my opinion, to justify or even validate the ability of these scans to correctly interpret and receive echoes and data from 648 meters underneath the ground. In fact, 1,200 meters, as they also claim that they found structures, since these do not appear to be scans that occur at the same level below ground zero as what they claim they have been able to see underneath the pyramids in the Giza plateau. And unfortunately, when it comes to all of these fannings and areas that were scanned, he never provides an altitude. He never provides any information that could say, yes, but we were able to actually find precise scanning, say, 200 meters underground. He does not mention one time how deep these scans were able to successfully detect data. End of speaker 2. Are you ready for speaker 3? Speaker 3 is the big guy Corrado Malanga, and he begins his presentation 1 hour 52 minutes in. And one thing that I'm noticing already is the following, which I thought was fascinating. He's telling us that they received the images on the left, and he self-admitted that when they began looking at these, they understood absolutely nothing. He then proceeds to explain how important the different colors are because they represent different levels of vibration, which could mean different types of materials, different types of depth, whether there is something, whether there is an empty space, and then explains how he proceeds to use the computer software, never mention what software that is, in order to help them interpret this data. It's all interpretative, by the way. I do find it fascinating how someone who just explained how important the colors are also self-admits to be colorblind. Precisely on 1 hour, 52 minutes and 17 seconds in the presentation. In fact, there is a section in the presentation that I absolutely loved when he sees these squares and he keeps saying, you see this black square, and black means that there is no data, but the square is freaking orange, but he sees it black. And then he even says, and this area here, which probably you see as red, I don't know, I see it as an orange, maybe, I'm not sure. This is how he interprets the data. And at the end of the entire presentation says that the colors he doesn't see, sorry to hear, are light green, light blue, light brown. He says he does not see these colors. And I love the irony that a man who self-identified himself as being colorblind on multiple sections of this presentation at exactly 3 hours and 37 minutes in makes fun of a professional academic who saw their findings and thought they were basically amounting to nothing. And as he makes fun of her, he says, who knows, maybe she's colorblind, laughs and uses that to discredit their opposing opinion. Man, the irony is not lost on this one. Anyways, after a few interesting colorful pictures and 15 swear words, we get to 2 hours 33 minutes in. And this is great. This is where it really gets deep with the law. So he says that they identify what appear to be, so you can see them here in this little representation, and he describes these as some kind of underground structures that have the shape of a, diapason, a tuning fork. So he believes that there are structures like this underneath, and he even gives us a visual representation, this one here. But he says this, open quotes, a diapason, so a tuning fork, exactly while we were looking at something that vibrates, close quotes. And the way he explained this, and you've got to be a native to understand this, he is basically trying to say that it is not a case, it is fate, that they use sonar interpretation and they found structures that, lo and behold, remind you of the shape of a tuning fork. And he thinks there is a correlation. This is the level of professionalism of this presentation. A tuning fork to you, but maybe it's just arches at that point. But no, it's all fate, it's all destiny. It's the ancients from 36,400 years ago that wanted this man to make this correlation for whatever reason. Minute 241 is when he starts to finally tell us about these tubes, whatever you want to call them. He definitely does not use the word column because he says they are not full. They are empty. That's what he says. And then because, as you can see, there are these little segments here, he says that he interprets that as being glass. He specifically said that. So you have glass subtunnels, cords, whatever you want to call them, that go around these tubes that are empty inside. And there are multiple of these. On minute 247 is where he says that they ask artificial intelligence to improve the image by 16%. He does not explain to us what this improvement or enhancement means. He just says that it did, and then he does the calculation. If you look at the top of this image here, you see this little triangle, that's the pyramid. And then he tells us the pyramid is 137 meters tall. And by creating a connection between each single pixel and the height of the pyramid, they were able to then decide that these pipes, whatever you want to call them, go down for 648 meters under the ground. That's how they did it. I would like to underline that he says that this works even though they, and I am quoting him, stretched the image. But he says it doesn't matter because a pixel is a pixel. On 2 hours and 55 minutes in is the part where we get introduced to the concept of pareidolia. For those who don't know, pareidolia is the perception of apparently significant patterns or recognizable images, especially faces, in a random or accidental arrangements of shapes and lines. So, this is the part where he's trying to justify his findings by saying, you might think that this is just me trying to add these shapes, because remember, he's saying there are spirals underneath, and he's saying, but maybe that's just something I see. So he's seeing this because he wants to see something, but in reality, it's not that. Maybe it's something else, but it's not that. Here is how he counters that counter-argument, and that's where we get into the AI part. He says, open quotes, you see that, but I don't see anything. Does artificial intelligence make stuff up? Question. The AI does not have the phenomenon of pareidolia, and it does not make things up. So can the AI identify shapes that are fake? Question. No, because pareidolia is a psychoanalytical phenomenon. Close quotes. So, and this is not the only time when he uses this defense. He's saying, we ran the images and our interpretations through the AI, and the AI said, yeah, you're right, these are tubes. Oh yeah, you're right, that's a cube. And then he says the AI never gets anything wrong, so we can't be wrong about it. This, the AI never gets anything wrong, is what this man stated 3 times during this conference. 3. And the 3rd time is my favorite, because it goes even further, and we dive into the conspiracy theory. Because of course there is a conspiracy theory and a cover-up situation that he's mentioning, and I absolutely love that part. Stick until the end. He then tells us that we are 648 meters under the ground. For whatever reason, he tells us, and it's significant apparently, that 648 is in fact double 324. And he says that 324 is a fundamental number because, this I'm quoting here, because it's a number that he calls epidiotic, meaning the length of the axis of space and the length of the axis of time. And 324 divided by 2 is 162. And then he tells us that 162 is important because 161.8 is the golden ratio. And I guess that's the message from the reptilians. He didn't say that. He does say, however, that we need to keep these data in mind for the future. And then he leaves it at that. Once again, just like the first speaker, he comes up with crazy numbers. He multiplies these numbers or subtracts these numbers to other numbers without any reason whatsoever, and then uses the whatever number that he has found to create some form of false correlation that has no grounding in anything, and decides that that's very important, and he never explains to us why. 3 hours and 6 minutes in, once again presents the AI as a cover-all, win-all argument and says, we asked the AI, after explaining what we found, what it thought this could be. And the AI came up with this idea. The AI explains that there is a presence of some emptiness in this space. Hypothetically speaking, these would be the really dark areas in the scan analysis. But then he says that these blue areas that are dark in the scan provided by the radar indicates subterranean emptiness, but they could also suggest the presence of natural cavities or artificial cavity. He, however, as he reads this, misreads it, and instead of reading O here, which means or, he reads it as which means and, adding therefore the conclusion said by the AI, which the AI didn't, that these empty sections could be natural and artificial, while the AI said natural or artificial. Did he misread it? Was it a mistake? Was it done on purpose? I have no idea, but it's a big thing to now claim that the AI said that these are artificial since it did not. The picture appears later, but 3 hours, 9 minutes and 12 seconds in is when he tells us that these cubes that would be at the very basis of these pipes are, according to him, what I normally refer to as the rooms or the chambers of Amenti. Then he finally explains to us what the purpose of all this is. He says these were built to support the weight of the pyramid, and without all of this infrastructure underneath the ground, plus a plating that allegedly is supposed to be specifically under the pyramid would have sunk, and that right now would be at least 50 meters under ground zero, below ground zero. 3 hours and 44 minutes in is when he starts talking shit about modern day archaeologists and Egyptologists. 3 hours, 45 minutes is when he begins to go deeply into a discussion about the Osiris shaft, which is basically an underground complex that has been found. We do know that this exists, but through their scannings, they say that first and foremost, once again, Egyptology, archaeologists, scientists, they're all wrong. He claims that the sarcophagus that is found in here is made of a type of stone that is not present in Africa. He says that this stone was mined in Turkey, and he also says that it's mildly radioactive. His own words. 3 hours, 47 minutes and 17 seconds in, he also says that this black square that we see at the bottom of this underground complex is probably made of the metal tungsten. Tungsten. That would be fascinating. I would love if that were true. But however, he provides no evidence, and the only justification for this remark is the fact that it looks black because it could mean that it's empty, but it could also be that it's tungsten because it would not vibrate, I guess. The conference finally finishes, and that's the part where the presenter now encourages people to buy their books and get a signed copy. So, all in all, for this second episode, I might make more. What did I get from this conference? As I say, extremely esoterical sounding. There is a lot of terrible flaws in methodology. A lot of the justification, particularly the sections on the numbers and how these ancient people were speaking to them specifically, is absolute complete nonsense. And therefore, this kind of counters the argument that some people have presented where they say, oh, well, they had to go and present and give this presentation with the likes of, well, the channel in question that was the host of this conference, even though these are a little quirky, a little corny, with a little aliens here and there, but they had to, because unfortunately they're cancelled by professional academia, and real universities wouldn't allow them to speak. But if that were the case, then the presentation should be perfect, excellent, very, very professional. And if that were the case, even if the environment in which this was hosted was with the reptilians, at least we could say, well, that's the line of defense, that's how we justify it. But as I've just explained, Speaker 1 and Speaker 3, it does sound like they belong specifically to this kind of context. Speaker 2, no, because he mostly went into the technical terms and how the technology works. He also mentioned that they have some kind of brevetto, so like a license in Malta. So they did get an exclusivity when it comes to this technology. They also said that it costs nothing. And this is another important factor. If it really costs nothing, and the third speaker was very proud of this, we spent no money to do this, that's what he said. But if that's true, then why don't you use, and he uses that to sort of counter instead the millions of dollars, the usual other types of technologies that are photographic and usually deployed by the government in that area. They cost a lot of money, but he says that all they provide is nonsense. He's very adamant when it comes to attacking other people and their research. But of course, but then he also says, look, ours cost nothing. But if that's true, then why don't you apply this technology for subterranean areas, and not a dam, not a tunnel in a mountain, which is above ground, but you have to provide and prove with stuff we already know and we have got mapped. It costs nothing, you said. Prove it. Use it. Show us that it actually works underground in possibly similar situations to what we would find underneath the Giza plateau. So also, once again, how you have to explain to us why water shouldn't interfere with the findings. But after you have proven that, since once again it costs nothing, then I would say we could start looking at this. And I am one of the proponents who says, you really want to know what's underneath? Maybe they got a lot of the stuff wrong, and clearly the methodology and the whole idea with the numbers and how they connect it to a ment is complete nonsense. But maybe there is something there. Maybe the scan did find some structures, and if that's the case, then go and dig. Go and dig. And of course, if the Egyptian government doesn't allow it, well, then I would be against the Egyptian government at that point. Because if this is true, and we can dig, and we find these pipes, whatever they are, well, already, even if they're made of stone, with glass, like they're saying around it, they would already show an incredible feat of architecture. And then we would want to understand why they did it. Is it really to provide support to these pyramids? But imagine if instead they excavate and they made it to titanium. Imagine if they go power. That would really rewrite history. But until you show me and you dig, I don't believe it. The only thing I'm willing to accept at this point is that maybe there is underneath. But this is a very newly used technology, and we don't know how reliable it is. They say it works, but they have a conflict of interest. They're selling books. And I want to close with this statement. Mr. Corrado Malanga stated that these pillars are used to support the weight of the pyramids. He stated that the chambers underneath are part of the mythological Amenti. But he also stated that the pyramids had the purpose of, open quotes, acting as a bell, which is used to gather vibration information in order to transport this information underneath. There's a lot of claims there. Is it real? Is it nonsense? Is it mostly nonsense, but maybe there actually is something underneath? We'll see. But for now, I've provided, as promised, a summary in English of everything they said with my own personal commentary. If you're still interested, I can continue, of course. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow for my next daily upload. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.